Well, is the Labour leader worried? Let's ask him now. Sir Keir Starmer, very good morning to you.
Morning.
Good morning.
Are you at all worried about George Galloway scooping up some disaffected Labour voters?
No. I mean, George is characterised by division and this sort of toxic way of splitting people up. I'm interested in bringing the country together. I'm interested in a changed Labour Party serving the country. So I'm not bothered by George Galloway.
One of the issues, of course, that he might have support on is what's happening in Gaza.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are becoming increasingly concerned. I just want to remind viewers of what you said to Nick Ferrari on LBC shortly after the October the 7th catastrophe. Let's have a look. Cutting off water, cutting off power. Now, you lost a lot of
can I just,
support when you said that.
I'm really glad you played the whole clip, so thank you for that, because when I said does have that right,
yes,
I was referring to the right to self-defence. So I was having a conversation about self-defence. I was not suggesting they had the right to cut off water or food. They do not have that right. I managed to have the opportunity to clarify that pretty quickly afterwards.
What should happen
but
now,
Starmer, I mean,
with that?
situation...
do you regret even saying that Israel has that right when it comes to...
Well, I meant the right to self-defence. I think that's clear when you see the whole clip.
Did you misspeak in that clip?
You know, in retrospect, I would have been better to have said does have that right to self-defence. I accept that. In interviews, sometimes you refer back to a previous answer. But look, the situation is intolerable now. We do need a ceasefire and we need it in place straight away. And I would support all of the talks and negotiations that are going on to get that ceasefire. That allows the space for those hostages to come out. They've been held for a very, very long time. Humanitarian aid is desperately needed, absolutely desperately needed. The situation on the ground is catastrophic. And what a ceasefire would do is to provide the space, the foot in the door, if you like, for a political process towards a two-state solution, which in the end is the only way that we're going to get lasting peace.
Do you think Israel's gone too far?
Look, I am concerned about what Israel has done, and now they are threatening an offensive on Rafah. I've been very clear that cannot happen. We would not tolerate that, so we've had to be really clear about that. I think there's a line there that has to be drawn, and we've drawn it, and that's why we're saying there needs to be a ceasefire.
But there's nothing we can do, is there? I mean, we have no influence in this matter at all. Israel will do exactly what it chooses to do.
I think working with our allies, I obviously speak to the Americans a lot, to our European allies, to leaders in various countries across the Middle East. We do have to work with our allies. I'm concerned whether Israel is listening in the way that Israel should be listening to her allies on this, but we need that ceasefire in place, and it needs to be in place straight away.
I want to clarify your position on transgender, because I'm not sure what it is, looking at the record. Obviously, we know overnight the National Health has stated that, as far as they're concerned, sex is a biological fact, and henceforth they'll be banning trans women from going onto female wards. Now, let's just have a quick look at your record. This will only take about 15 seconds. In 2021, you said that MP Rosie Duffield was wrong to say that only women have a cervix. In the next year, asked to define a woman in an interview in The Times, you said a woman is a female adult. In addition to that, trans women are women. Later that month, you said in an LBC phone-in, well, you just simply refused to answer the question of whether a woman can have a penis. And finally, in 2023, you said that for 99% of women, their gender is completely biological, and of course, they haven't got a penis. So just summarise, where do you stand on transgender and transgender rights? I want to know.
I start with biology.
Yep.
I'm worried about everybody eating their breakfast, by the way, and we're going...
No, don't worry about them. They've got strong stomachs, our viewers.
Biology, and obviously there's a distinction between sex and gender, and the Labour Party has championed women's rights for a very, very long time. Many of the changes in the law are as a result of Labour governments, and there are many more laws that need to change in favour of women.
If you start with biology, then why did you say about Rosie Duffield saying only women have a cervix? You said it is something that shouldn't be said. It is not right.
Well, look, what I said then and on other occasions is simply that I do not like the way that this becomes so quickly a toxic conversation. I want the conversation to be had with respect.
It's got pretty toxic for Rosie Duffield.
It has, but I think about that poor girl Brianna who was murdered, and the terrible circumstances of that death. And her mother, of course, came into Parliament not so long ago, and I met her. And I was really struck by her mother and this sense that it must be possible to have this conversation without sinking into a toxic conversation. But
yes, of course.
Starts...
And everyone has sympathy for Brianna Ghey and her family. My goodness, that is an absolutely appalling crime. And we can treat people who are trans women with respect and dignity. But I go back to your statement, you start with biology.
Yeah.
And that is what the NHS constitution is now entrenching. But you told the MP Rosie Duffield that she was wrong to say only women have a cervix.
All I was really saying there was I don't want this to go into that toxic place, but just taking you up on the issue... I don't think
we took it to the toxic place, though, with respect.
Just on the question of today, I mean, when I was Chief Prosecutor, Director of Public Prosecutions, I spent all 5 years I had working on violence against women and girls and working with women's groups in particular. And they impressed on me, quite rightly, the importance of safe spaces for women, biological women. And I've always firmly believed that and continue to work with them on that. And I want to make the reduction of violence against women and girls a major mission to the government.
That? For instance, women's prisons only being accessible to biological women?
Well, I agree with that. And so far as the hospitals today, the NHS is concerned, I agree with that as well.
And what would you say to transgender pressure groups, who I think it's a fair prediction to say that transgender pressure groups are going to be saying that a transgender woman is a woman and should be allowed on a female ward? What, if one of them was sitting here and said that to you, what would be your response?
Well, I disagree. Right. I disagree. Right. In the same way I disagree on safe spaces in relation to those who've survived domestic violence and abuse. What I would say, just on this question of same-sex wards, or single-sex wards, I'm sorry, is that there's clarity today of the Constitution. I'm not sure it needed clarifying, but there we are, it's being clarified. Clarity is always a good thing. But the question is availability of single-sex wards, because this was being talked about when David Cameron was Prime Minister, and he said he was going to make sure there were adequate numbers. There are less now than then.
Yes.
So what I would say to the government...
There's definitely an issue about capacity, but I want to go back...
But that's pretty important, because the words on the page and the Constitution are not going to change anything on the ground if there isn't the availability of the wards.
Yeah, it's about what they do, not just what we say. But I just want to get the clarity. Is it right or is it wrong for Rosie Duffield to say only women have a cervix?
Well, look, biologically, she, of course, is right about that.
So do you owe her an apology?
Well, I don't want this to go back into this toxic place where everybody is divided.
Would you say sorry to Rosie Duffield for the way that she's been treated?
Look, Rosie Duffield and I get on very well. We discuss a number of issues. She's a much respected member of the Parliamentary Labour Party, and I want to have a discussion with her and anybody else about how we go forward in a positive way.
Okay.
Can we...
Sorry, just one last question on this. There will be transgender patients, female patients, who will not want to go onto male wards, and I can completely understand their position as well. So what do we do in that situation?
Well, we have to accommodate that situation as it arises, but treat everybody with respect and with dignity.
It's separate rooms, then?
Well, look, I do not accept that this is an issue that cannot be resolved with respect and dignity. Look, respect and dignity are something I've carried with me since I was a boy. It's my driving values, which I got from my parents.
They are just words. So do we provide separate...
No, they're not.
Do we provide separate rooms?
They're not just words.
For transgender patients?
They're not just words.
Do we have the resources
They're
to do
about the
that?
approach you take to a situation. Where we need to make accommodations, we can make accommodations. Right. I don't think any... And look, as a country, we're a pretty reasonable, tolerant bunch. And most people know that there are a small number of individuals who do not identify with the gender that they were born into. Many of them suffer great distress and trauma. And for my part, I'm perfectly happy to say I would treat them as I would treat anybody, with respect.
All right, you've made that clear. Let's talk about your deputy, Angela Rayner. A lot of people simply cannot understand why you personally, as the leader of the party, won't look at the paperwork which she says exonerates her from the allegations that she's done something wrong. Now, other members of your party have looked at it and they've told you that it's all fine and it's cool and she'll be in the clear. I don't understand why you persistently refuse to look at it, because, to be honest with you, if I was in your position, I'd want to see it. I'd want to make my own mind up.
In the end, the question we're addressing here is where Angela Rayner was living 10 or 15 years ago. And Angela's answered that question, I don't know how many times.
Yeah, but why wouldn't you look at the evidence that she says exonerates?
I'll come to that. The question at the end is quite a straightforward question, which is, do you believe Angela Rayner about where she says she was living? The answer to that question, from me, is yes.
What, and you think if you look at the paperwork...
I don't need legal advice.
You're kind of doubting her story. Is that what you're saying? I don't need legal advice
to tell me whether I believe Angela Rayner when she tells me where she was living.
Aren't you curious to look at it?
Well, I've given many legal advices over the years.
Yeah.
They're all confidential, and they're confidential for a reason. Because people tell their lawyers...
No, but it's not confidential, because...
But of course it is.
Other members in the Labour Party have looked at it, so it's not confidential. But you haven't, and I'll just put this to you. Is it a case of see no evil, speak no evil? Are you concerned that if you look at it as leader, you're going to see something in there, a paragraph, a reference, which makes you think, whoops, that's going to cause problems? And I don't want that running up to an election. I don't want to know that. I don't want to see that. I'd rather not know.
No, not at all.
No?
But if a member of my shadow cabinet tells me that they're off to have an operation, I don't ask to see the medical advice. I don't ask for their medical notes.
No, but she's under a police investigation. It's a totally different... That analogy doesn't hold, I'm afraid.
The question is very, very simple, which is, where was Angela Rayner living 10 to 15 years ago? She's answered that question. I believe her. I don't need to read a legal advice to tell me that I believe my deputy when she tells me where she was living 10 to 15 years ago. I believe her.
And it's really not because you're a bit bothered that if you look at it, you'll see something which will force you to change your position.
The legal advice is not going to help me on the question I've already answered, which is, I believe Angela Rayner. I would also just gently say this. Rishi Sunak's wife was a non-dom for many years. She's given it up now. I would be, you'd say curiosity, I would be intrigued and curious to see the tax advice that Rishi Sunak and his family have had, because they've avoided I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of pounds.
So you'd rather look at theirs than Angela Rayner's?
Interesting. I would gently invite you, when Rishi Sunak is next on, to see whether you can get him to show you his tax advice.
Well, because he's not under a criminal investigation.
Yeah, but his family have avoided a huge amount of tax, and out of curiosity, you might want to ask him what advice he got about that.
It's bang on 8:30, and we know you have a train to catch. You're going to Blackpool to talk to Blackpool, aren't you?
Yes, I am. Yeah. About shoplifting, which is, they think, decriminalised now. This is shop workers. It's got up
and a tax on
huge amount, and a tax on workers and assaults on our people who work in our shops. So I'm off to see them and to tell them that we're going to change the law on shoplifting to make sure that £200 limit, where no action is effectively taken under this government, is going to be changed, and I want them better protected against abuse.
Okay, always assuming your train's on time. That there is no rule which says that shoplifting under £200 should not...
it's not a rule, but it's a change of approaches to how it gets prosecuted, which has led to this understanding that it isn't prosecuted. And I'm afraid the facts on the ground show that under £200, these crimes are simply not being dealt with.
Well, let's hope your train's on time. We did want to talk to you about the railways and renationalising them, but haven't got time. Maybe next time. OK, have a good train journey.
Sir Keir Starmer, thank you very much indeed.